Hi, everybody.
Everyone see my slides okay?
Yes, I'm just going to say one little thing and then we can move forward. My name is Emma Eitri. I'm the Development and Communication Coordinator. This is our February edition of WalkMass Network. We will be speaking with Stella and Ethan from the Boston Region MPO. Stella, you're good to go.
Thank you for the introduction. And hi, everyone. My name is Stella Jordan. Thank you all for being here today, and thanks WalkMass for having us. I'm the Public Engagement Program Manager at the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. I'm joined today by my colleagues Ethan Lapointe, our Transportation Improvement Program Manager, and also Ali Clayman, our Vision Zero project manager. They'll be discussing the TIP process and our Vision Zero planning work, respectively, in a moment. But I'd like to just get us started by just kind of briefly outlining the Boston Region MPO's work and what we do to sort of set the context for our conversation today. And I'm sure some of you are already familiar with MPOs and the role they play in regional planning. I know you've heard from some other MPOs in Massachusetts recently. So I'll keep this light, but feel free to reach out afterwards if you want a deeper dive into the world of MPOs. The Boston Region MPO is the largest of 13 other MPOs in our state, and really, the key purpose of MPOs is to facilitate regional coordination and holistic collaborative decision making around regional transportation planning. So, the Boston Region MPO convenes 97 cities and towns in the greater Boston area. Our region spans from the urban core up to Ipswich and Rockport in the north, down to Marshfield in the south, and out to basically the Interstate 495 loop to the west. With 3 million residents, we are really a very geographically, demographically, and economically diverse region. And that brings with it a really broad range of local contexts and challenges and needs. And at the MPO, we work across a variety of areas to address those local needs really through a regional lens. So the MPO facilitates collaboration and coordination among many different types of stakeholders in the region, including state agencies, regional agencies, transit agencies, cities and towns, advocates, and members of the public. We develop a vision for transportation in the Boston region, and we set goals and performance targets around things like safety, equity, and mobility to help us work towards that vision. We study and analyze regionally significant transportation challenges and opportunities. We invest federal funds into locally and regionally important transportation improvement projects. And across all of this work, we really strive to create meaningful opportunities for members of the public and transportation advocates and other interested stakeholders to participate in and help shape transportation planning and decision making in our region. And one of the main things that we're really excited to be here to talk with you all today about is um, really one of the impactful ways that we achieve or work towards our long-term vision and our goals for the region's transportation system, the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, which is the plan for allocating funding to projects around the region. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Ethan to talk a little bit more about the TIP and ways that you all can get more involved and advocate for projects in your communities.
Thanks, Stella, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ethan Lapointe. As Stella introduced, I manage the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, for the Boston Region MPO. During my section of the presentation today, I'm going to briefly introduce what a Transportation Improvement Program is. Each of the 13 MPOs in the Commonwealth have one. How do projects get on it? What are different project types that are on the TIP? And then, of course, most importantly, how do MPOs select which projects are funded by their regional target dollars? I'll explain what that is later, through the program. And also, towards the tail end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about how some of our prioritization efforts overlap with other ongoing activities that our MPO is conducting, specifically with regard to our Vision Zero action plan, which my colleague Ali Clayman will be talking about a little bit later in this presentation as well. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention I'm also joined by Adriana Jacobson, who works with me directly on the TIP. specifically on some of our quick build micro project programs and also transit work, which I'll get into a little bit of. So to talk about money for a bit on the next slide, like I mentioned, the Boston Region MPO is one of 13 MPOs across the Commonwealth. It is the largest of the MPOs with our 97 municipalities. We represent about 43% of all of the population in Massachusetts. And this chart on screen here illustrates the totality of all of the funding that is captured within our 5-year capital plan. It's about $6.3 billion. Now, of that, about 3.8, the majority of the funding, is from the MBTA. There's a smaller pool of funding, about $110 million, that comes from our regional transit authorities, the Cape Ann Transportation Authority and the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. The reason why, while we're going to be mostly talking about surface transportation and roadways in this presentation, that we include our transit authorities is that under federal law, a TIP has to include all federal transportation funding within a region. That then takes us into the next $1.6 billion. These are MassDOT priority projects, which are included within the Boston region. The MPO is sub-allocated a portion of funding from MassDOT each year that amounts across 5 years to about $730 million in our current TIP for 2025 to 2029. It's worth noting we update TIPs annually, so we're currently working on one for 2026 through 2030. When each MPO completes their annual development of a TIP, MassDOT takes each of the 13 TIPs, looks at their entire statewide highway program. In the Boston region case, that's that 1.6 billion, but then they add in each of the other portions from the other MPOs, and then they create the STIP, or the State Transportation Improvement Program. When you add in other state-funded transportation efforts, that then leads to the Capital Investment Program, or the CIP. Historically, if you are familiar with how the MBTA has developed their capital program, MassDOT and the MBTA had formerly created a unified CIP, but have since created their own separate CIPs to manage their different processes and timings there, to my understanding. If we go on to the next slide, just to talk about how the MPO prioritizes projects for that $730 million, we utilize the framework that's established by our long-range plan to identify 6 key vision areas. And these vision areas determine the specific eligibility criteria that projects are graded against when they apply for funding, focusing first off on equity, facilitating an inclusive planning process for projects, but also making sure that neither the benefits nor the disadvantages that may result from a project are disproportionately borne by people in disadvantaged communities. I'll talk more about safety later, but also the majority of our discussion on safety is going to focus on our Vision Zero efforts, and there's a lot of overlap there between those two elements of our work. Mobility and reliability really refers to making sure that if your phone says it's going to take 10 minutes to get where you need to go, that it does in fact take 10 minutes. Travel time reliability applies not only to all modes of transportation, but I think also in recent weeks and months is particularly salient when it comes to transit. And with regard to access and connectivity, this is a focus again on improving transportation choice and providing for additional options, especially intermodal connectivity and options there, and focusing on connecting people to places instead of solely on traffic throughput. This supports economic vitality and quality of life. With our most recent adoption of our long-range plan, we also incorporate a new resilience category for the visioning goals, which focuses on transportation improvements for sustainable environments and improving the ability of people and the transportation system to adapt to climate change and other conditions. And the MPO has supported a related program for clean air and healthy communities as well, which still persists in this tip, focusing on greenhouse gas emissions reduction and also access to open space. One example, just very quickly on the next slide, that helps to elevate these kinds of visioning goals, and this is a more recent development from the MPO, is our investment in a regional bike share system. In the case of the Boston region, it's Blue Bikes. The MPO has been greatly involved, especially with our partners over the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, in expanding a regional bike share system to support first and last mile trip connections, with expansion projects funded in Arlington, Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Malden, Medford, Newton, Revere, Salem, and Watertown. And this year for our next tip, We also have applications in the hopper for Brookline and Chelsea to expand that system further. It's worth noting as well, we are also allocating funding to sustain this program by replacing existing stations now that Blue Bikes is about 10 years old. I think it's actually a little bit more than 10 years old now. Moreover, we're trying to modernize it through electrification of not only the actual fleet of Blue Bikes for e-bikes, but also electrifying stations into the grid so that way municipalities have a more sustainable way of generating or sustaining operating costs. And we're seeing and collecting data that monitor and indicate higher rates of e-bike usage in other communities throughout the Boston region besides Boston and Cambridge, looking at Everett, Chelsea, and Malden as well, which help to inform plans for potential expansion even further. If we go on the next slide, besides looking at just the bike share system, I'm going to start pivoting a little bit more towards capital projects. Another example is how we've coordinated with our partners over at DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and MassDOT to expand and improve the regional trail network, where the MPO is currently funding the last stage of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in Sudbury, in addition to other stages currently funded by MassDOT, and the MPO is also contributing to the funding for the Massachusetts Central Rail Trail, referred to as the Belmont Community Path in the town of Belmont. We're also looking at segments and extensions of the Border to Boston Trail and Swampscott and other elements as well in our region. There's other trail gaps too, like the Mystic River Greenway in Medford via Wellington Underpass, and also some bridges over Interstate 95 and Route 1, which are incorporated into the Independence Greenway project in Peabody, where the MPO is funding two sections of that project. On this next slide, this is just an example of some of the safety investments that we make, which I'll defer to more. In addition to trail investments, we also like to focus on complete streets. This is an example of the Route 27 corridor in Natick, a recently completed TIP project. The photo on the left shows the state of disrepair of the sidewalks before the project was constructed, the lack of accessibility of the sidewalk, and also obstructions for utility poles, which have been alleviated with the completion of this project to create a safer, more walkable environment along a corridor that also features service from the Metro West Regional Transit Authority's bus routes. And on the next slide, we also see a more blended version of this along the Highland Ave and Needham Street corridor in Newton and Needham. This corridor includes a cycle track as well at sidewalk level that is supposed to be free of obstructions and will be free of obstructions by the time the contract is complete. With that, I'll actually quickly pass it over to my colleague Ali to talk a little bit more about other ways that the MPO is investing in safety projects.
Great, thanks, Ethan. Yeah, as Ethan said, a key part of selecting projects is a focus on safety. And in the last long-range plan for the region, the MPO strengthened its safety goal and committed to achieving zero transportation-related deaths and serious injuries for all roadway users. And as part of working towards that goal, we applied for and were awarded over $2 million in federal funds to develop a regional Vision Zero action plan. And we're actually one of 9 MPOs in the Commonwealth working on regional Vision Zero plans. I know this group heard from Merrimack Valley Planning Commission last month, I think, about their regional Vision Zero work. Next slide. So we're all here because we know transportation safety is a problem. It's a problem in the Boston region, and it affects people's lives every day. Each year in the region, close to 1,000 people are killed or seriously injured on our streets. Next slide. And we know that people traveling outside of cars are more impacted, more likely to be killed or seriously injured compared to people traveling in vehicles. So people walking, biking, and rolling represent 13% of all injury crashes. That includes minor injuries, but 28% of fatal and serious injury crashes. Next slide. And I know many of you are probably familiar with Vision Zero and you're doing safe streets work in your communities because you know it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to accept deaths and serious injuries as an inevitable side effect of moving around our cities and towns. So Vision Zero is a data-driven, proactive, and systemic approach to roadway safety, focused on understanding where the crashes and risks are and who is most affected by unsafe infrastructure, and then using that information to change how we design and build our roads, how we educate travelers, and how we set our speed limits and other policies to create a transportation system where we recognize that responsibility for safety is shared, and it takes leadership and commitment from all levels of government to work to improve safety. So over the past several months, we've been focused on the engagement, policy, and data analysis aspects of the Vision Zero action plan work. And in the next few slides, I'll give an overview of what we've done, what we've heard so far, and how we're thinking of applying what we're learning to the MPO's work. So on engagement, the slide summarizes that. So we've done engagement so far with municipal staff and the public. We've heard from municipal staff about some of the top challenges they face as they try to do safe streets work in their cities and towns. These are related to funding, staff time, and public buy-in. And we've heard that they want guidance on how to prioritize corridors and projects and how to get public and leadership buy-in for more safe streets work. And we've heard from the public. We've gotten over 500 responses to a public survey that we had out and over 700 comments on our online safety concerns map. And the main things we're focused on next for stakeholder engagement are at the municipal level, sharing the high injury network, which I'll talk about in a few more slides, and holding office hours and having targeted discussions with municipal staff to make sure that the analysis that we're doing and the mapping is helpful to them. And then on the public side, we're planning a series of focus groups with stakeholders that are traditionally harder for us to reach, like seniors and people with disabilities. And we're working with community organization partners to do engagement in communities. Next slide. On the policy and process side of Vision Zero, again, just an overview of what we've done and what we've heard. So far, we've had several conversations with government stakeholders, including Mass Municipal Association and individual conversations with municipalities, trying to reach a range of inner core and more suburban, and municipalities with more mature Vision Zero programs in the region. And when we've talked to municipal staff and leadership, we hear a lot about challenges to making progress on safe streets or making faster progress. And then we've been trying to connect these challenges to policy and process changes. So some of the top challenges or needs we've heard are about data collection and the need for common collection techniques and tools. We always hear about speeding and speed limits. And of course, one of the main solutions on people's minds is automated enforcement and getting support for that at the state and local levels. In addition to enforcement, changing the design of our streets is critical to managing speeds. And another main challenge we hear is a lack of public and political support for safe street design changes. And one of the strategies we've talked about with municipal staff is the importance of getting the mandate for safe street design into local ordinances like complete streets or vulnerable road user ordinances. And then coming up next on the policy and process work, we're going to be engaging more with state partners, and we're going to be focusing on best practice research to make sure that we're capturing what others are doing in Massachusetts and also from other states. Next slide. So I mentioned the high injury network, and this is another element of Vision Zero and the data analysis, and it helps us understand where the most severe crashes are taking place. So using MassDOT 2018 to 2022 crash data and risk data, we developed a draft high injury and high risk network at the regional, sub-regional, and municipal levels. And we can put a link in the chat, and it'll also be posted on our website soon. So the high injury network captures 58% of fatal and severe injury crashes that take place on just 7% of roadway miles in the region. And the goal with the high injury network and this analysis is that it can be be as useful as possible for municipalities. We know not every municipality is going to do its own Vision Zero plan. So we want the regional plan to really be able to guide municipal staff and leadership in knowing where to invest and to help them prioritize roadway safety improvements. Next slide. So hopefully that's a helpful overview of what we've been working on and how we're thinking about Vision Zero at the regional level. This is just a high-level overview of the project schedule in 2024 and the first part of this year. We've continued to be focused on data, research, and engagement, and moving into the second part of this year, we'll connect that analysis and engagement and those findings to recommended strategies, target setting, and more discussions about these things with municipalities and the MPO board, and also thinking about progress tracking. And then at the end of this year and into the first part of next year, the MPO board will adopt the final action plan. Next slide. And then sort of going back to what Ethan was talking about, as we do this work, we're already thinking about how to use it to inform other MPO work and how it aligns with key safety work that MassDOT is doing. So some of the things we've been thinking about along these lines are using the high injury network and further prioritization of the network and tip project scoring. And if there's a high injury or high risk corridor in a municipality and they need assistance developing design concepts for safety improvements, this could be prioritized in our annual work planning. And then also making sure that we are thinking about how our data analysis and the high injury network overlaps with state plans and priorities, and including the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and MassDOT's Vulnerable Road User Assessment. So I will hand it back over to Ethan to talk more about safety projects and ways to be involved in project development.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. So kind of circling back on some ongoing projects, because earlier in this presentation we talked about recently completed efforts. I wanted to point out just some ongoing complete streets efforts that are currently underway in the Boston region that have been funded by the MPO. One being the rehabilitation of Mount Auburn Street in Watertown to incorporate improved multimodal infrastructure along that corridor. One of the other interesting ones that we have is in the town of Littleton along Foster Street, which does not currently have sidewalks, but will feature a full shared use path that will connect into the Littleton and Route 495 commuter rail station as well. We also have seen with some of the recent adaptations to MassDOT's Healthy Communities guidelines, the incorporation of these shared use paths into all kinds of highway and roadway projects. This next project, which is a bridge rehabilitation over the Charles River in Newton, has actually also served as the linchpin for a trail extension along Route 30 between Newton and Weston. And that is a trail extension that is also funded even further in a separate project in Weston in this tip, in a later year, of course. Besides what's currently under construction now, we also have some upcoming efforts to keep an eye on. One being a very multimodal project in the form of the Columbus Avenue bus lanes in the city of Boston. This is the second phase, taking the existing bus lanes from Jackson Square up north to Ruggles Station along the Orange Line alignment, and also neatly running parallel to the Southwest Corridor path as well. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we also have two separate extensions for the Independence Greenway and Peabody in the next few years of the tip. And we also have the first phase of the Belmont Community Path starting for 2026 right now. It is worth noting, while I've talked a lot about what the tip has successfully completed and what we have coming up soon, that there are some gaps in what the MPO has historically been able to support for municipalities. The main one being that on the next slide, the tip is primarily a construction funding vehicle. Projects operate and are funded across multiple phases of development, planning to design to construction, and then punch list, but punch list is basically construction for purposes of this presentation. Until very recently, MPOs did not support municipalities in Massachusetts with design funding. Municipalities instead were required to pay for the totality of the design for their projects, either from a series of grants they might receive, like a MassWorks grant, a municipal paving grant, or entirely from local town meeting appropriations. It's also important to note that the capacity for municipalities to conduct these designs varies greatly between municipalities, not just within the Boston region, but also across the entirety of the Commonwealth. When a town does have a full-time planner, which not all do, that planner is often responsible for doing land use and transportation, or that planner may delegate all of the transportation planning to the DPW, which is also trying to do sewer, utility, and other work in town. It is rare that a municipality actually has staff to focus on transportation planning only as a specialist. Now, in recent years, specifically last year, the Boston MPO has started funding project design through a pilot program. And in future tip cycles, we believe that other MPOs in Massachusetts, including the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, are also going to be following suit as well there. We've also heard that some of the other smaller MPOs are starting to investigate it as well. It's also worth noting that on the next slide, similar to what Ali was talking about, the Vision Zero effort, which is complementary to all this, MPOs provide technical assistance and planning support to municipalities as well by way of MPO staff. This image on the right is an example of a technical assistance project that was completed this past fall for the town of Braintree uh, by the Boston Region MPO, and this was for the Route 37 corridor. It is worth noting, though, that the demand from municipalities to conduct technical assistance through MPOs often greatly exceed the abilities and capacity for MPO staff to accomplish that effort. And critically, again, the TIP has historically been a construction funding vehicle. Project ideation and visioning is not generally something the TIP can support because a project already has to exist in order for it to come through the TIP. The phrase that Mass often uses is initiation to start it. A project that is not initiated cannot be funded. And this is a key opportunity, if we go on to the next slide, where different advocacy organizations, both on our local and regional level, can be directly involved in TIP projects. For example, we've seen from some of our municipalities where they may have a local bicycle or pedestrian committee or a blended committee of both, that these committees can be helpful to identify priority areas for the installation of new bicycle racks that the MPO could fund. Or they may identify priority streets or schools to upgrade through a Safe Routes to School contract to be delivered. It's also worth noting that besides even conducting the boots on the ground grassroots planning activities, that advocacy groups can have a very important continued role even after a project is already on the tip. The tip is a 5-year plan that is updated every single year, and once the project is on the tip, it has to stay on track to do so. I mentioned earlier that town meeting appropriations are in play for projects, and some of you may be familiar with how trying to appropriate funding through town meeting can be a difficult effort if there is not sufficient local support to demonstrate that the project should advance. The same also applies to right-of-way acquisitions as well, which are very common when it comes to trail projects. It's also worth noting, even outside of a local context, that more regional advocacy organizations and coalitions are helpful because the transportation network is not local. Towns often focus on prioritizing investments within their local borders, and they do work with their neighbors. But part of the job of the MPO and also our other partners is making sure that the transportation system does not change drastically, that the sidewalk does not end when you move into your next town. Very few people only have destinations that are within their towns, especially for work commutes or other kinds of activities. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to pass things over back, I think, to either Stella or Ali for the next slide, which just includes some contact information on how to get in touch with MPO staff.
Yeah, so input and engagement into the Vision Zero work is ongoing. The website link is there, and we have an online safety concerns map. In the next several months, we'll be organizing focus groups, as I mentioned, and community events. So please reach out with information and to get involved. Thanks.
I think that might be all of our slides. But I also will drop the link to our TIP webpage in the chat in a moment as well. And please don't hesitate to follow up with any of us afterwards. We can share our emails too. We are always happy to talk more about any and all aspects of the MPO's work and share ways that folks on the call today can get involved. But with that, we wanted to make sure that we also had plenty of time just for discussion and Q&A, excuse me. So would be happy to turn it back over to all of you as well for that.
I would say the first person, Rachel, had a question. She put it in about 20 minutes ago. Rachel, do you want to ask your question?